In the last episode, we witnessed how Bhishma's terrible vow created a dynasty built on sacrifice and compromise. But if you thought that was the end of the tragedy, you haven't seen anything yet. What if I told you that the throne of Hastinapura would pass to a king who couldn't see his own kingdom? What if the rightful heir was cursed to die the moment he touched his wife with love? And what if these two brothers, one blind, one cursed, would father the two groups of cousins whose rivalry would tear the world apart? This is where the personal becomes political. This is where family dysfunction transforms into national catastrophe. This is where we meet the fathers of the Pandavas and Kauravas, the men whose inability to rule properly would doom their children to war. Welcome to episode 2 of the Mahabharata. Today, we discover how a curse and a blindfold set the Let's quickly recap where we are. Bhishma, bound by his terrible vow, cannot take the throne or produce heirs. The kingdom passed to Satyavadi's sons, first Chitrangada, who died young in battle, then Vichitravirya, who died of illness before producing children. The dynasty faced extinction. In desperation, Satyavadi called upon her secret firstborn son, the sage Vyasa, to father children with Vichitravirya's widows through the ancient practice of niyoga. This was legal according to Dharma, but it was an emergency measure that would have consequences. The children born from this arrangement would be flawed from conception, marked by the circumstances of their birth. And it is these flawed princes who would inherit a broken throne, setting in motion events that would lead to the annihilation of their entire family line. Today's episode is about these two brothers, about the curse of leadership, and about how the personal failings of kings become the suffering of nations. When Vyasa came to fulfill his duty, he was not a pleasant sight. Years of meditation and asceticism in the forest had transformed him. His hair was matted and wild, his body was thin and weathered, his eyes burned with spiritual intensity. He looked more like a wild hermit than a prince. Queen Ambika, the elder widow, was called to the chamber. She had been told what would happen, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of it. When Vyasa entered the room, Ambika was struck with such terror and revulsion that she squeezed her eyes shut and kept them closed throughout the entire encounter. She couldn't bear to look at him. She kept her eyes tightly closed, praying for it to be over quickly. 9 months later, she gave birth to a son, a healthy, strong son, except for one terrible detail. The child was born completely blind. Vyasa explained the truth to Satyavadi. The queen closed her eyes in fear during conception. Therefore, her son will be born without sight. He will be blind from birth, and he will remain blind his entire life. The child was named Dhritarashtra, which means he whose kingdom is firm, or he who holds the kingdom strongly. It was a hopeful name, perhaps even a desperate one, but the irony would become apparent soon enough. How could a blind man hold a kingdom firmly when he couldn't even see it? According to the laws of Dharma and royal succession, a king must be physically perfect. A blind man, no matter how capable otherwise, could not sit on the throne of Hastinapura. Dhritarashtra was born a prince but could never become a king. Think about what this means. From the moment of his birth, Dhritarashtra was denied his birthright. He was the eldest son, he should have been king, but because of his mother's moment of weakness, a moment she couldn't control, he would spend his entire life watching others rule what should have been his. This is where resentment takes root. This is where the seeds of the Great War are truly planted. In the heart of a man who was born to rule, but forbidden from doing so. Satyavadi was not satisfied. One son was not enough, especially a son who could never be king. The dynasty needed an heir who could actually rule. So she sent for Vyasa again, and this time it was Ambalika's turn, the younger widow. Ambalika had heard what happened to her sister. She knew what to expect. She steeled herself, determined not to make the same mistake. She would not close her eyes, she would be brave. But when Vyasa entered her chamber, a different reaction took hold. Ambalika didn't close her eyes, but all the color drained from her face. She went completely pale, turning as white as death itself from sheer dread. She maintained eye contact, but her body betrayed her terror. 9 months later, she gave birth to a son as well. This child was not blind, but he was born with an unnaturally pale complexion, almost sickly in appearance. His skin lacked the healthy glow that babies should have. Vyasa explained again. The queen grew pale during conception. Therefore, her son is born with pale skin and a weak constitution. He will be called Pandu. Pandu means pale or whitish. Another name that described a flaw, another reminder of the compromised circumstances of his birth. But unlike his older brother, Pandu could become king. He was not blind, he was physically whole, even if not perfectly healthy. The throne that was denied to Dhritarashtra would go to Pandu instead. Imagine being Dhritarashtra, older, stronger perhaps, more capable in many ways, and watching your younger, paler, weaker brother get everything that should have been yours simply because you cannot see. This is not a story about evil. This is a story about injustice that festers, about resentment that builds over years, about how the rules meant to protect a kingdom can create the very conflicts that destroy it. But the story doesn't end there. Satyavati looked at her two grandsons, one blind, one pale, and still worried. What if Pandu died without heirs? What if something happened? The dynasty was still fragile. She sent for Vyasa a third time. But this time neither Ambika nor Ambalika would go. They had fulfilled their duty twice. They could not bear to do it again. They had endured enough, so they sent a servant woman in disguise, dressed in the queen's clothes. This woman was brave, or perhaps simply resigned to her fate. When Vyasa came to her, she did not close her eyes. She did not grow pale. She faced him calmly, without fear or revulsion. 9 months later, she gave birth to a son who was perfect in every way. Healthy, strong, wise beyond his years. He was named Vidura, and he would become the most intelligent and moral man in the entire dynasty. But there was one problem. Vidura was born to a servant. By the rigid laws of caste and succession, he could never be king, no matter how perfect he was. He could advise kings, serve them, guide them, but he could never rule. So now we have 3 sons of 3 mothers. Dhritarashtra, who should be king but cannot rule because he is blind. Pandu, who would be king but was physically weak. And Vidura, who would have been the perfect king but could never rule because of his birth. The throne was already fracturing before anyone even sat on it. The 3 brothers grew up together in the palace of Hastinapura, raised by Bhishma and taught by the best teachers in the land. But they grew up knowing their places, understanding the invisible chains that bound them. Dhritarashtra was physically the strongest. Despite his blindness, he developed incredible power. He could crush iron with his bare hands. He was intelligent, charismatic, and natural leader. In a different world with different rules, he would have been a great king. But every day he was reminded of what he could not have. Every ceremony where Pandu was honored as the heir, every council meeting where Pandu sat in the seat of succession, every time someone spoke of the future king, Dhritarashtra heard it and felt the injustice burn deeper. Pandu was groomed for kingship. He was trained in politics, warfare, and administration. He was capable enough, though not exceptional. He knew he was not the strongest or the smartest, but the throne was his by law. And Vidura became the wisest of them all. He studied law, ethics, and philosophy. He could see the future unfolding, could predict the consequences of actions, could give counsel that would save kingdoms, but he knew that his words were only advice, never commands. He would forever be the voice that warned but could not compel. Bhishma watched these 3 boys grow, and perhaps he saw the danger. Perhaps he understood that this compromised succession would eventually explode into conflict. But he was bound by his vow. He could protect, could advise, could guide, but he could not rule, could not change the fundamental structure that was already poisoned. When the time came, Pandu was crowned king of Hastinapura. He was married to 2 remarkable women, Kunti and Madri, both princesses of great lineage. The kingdom had its king, its queens, and its future seemed secure. Dhritarashtra was also married to Gandhari, a princess from the Gandhara kingdom. Gandhari was beautiful, accomplished, and devoted. But when she learned that her husband was blind, she made a choice that would define her character forever. She took a cloth and tied it around her own eyes as a blindfold. She vowed that she would never see the world that her husband could not see. If he must live in darkness, then she would live in darkness with him. It was an act of profound devotion, or perhaps an act of profound denial. Think about this choice. Gandhari chose blindness out of love or loyalty, but in doing so, she also chose not to see what was happening around her. She chose not to witness the growing darkness in her own household. When the time came, she would not see, literally and metaphorically, the evil that her sons would commit. Pandu ruled well enough for a time. He was not a great king, but he was not a terrible one either. He expanded the kingdom through warfare, he maintained the laws, he performed his duties. But he had one great passion, hunting. He loved to hunt. Perhaps it was the one thing that made him feel truly powerful, truly in control. In the forest with his bow, he was not the pale king, not the second choice, not the lesser brother. He was a warrior in his element, and it was this passion that would doom him. One day Pandu was hunting deep in the forest. He heard sounds in the bushes, the sounds that he thought were a deer mating. Without looking carefully, driven by the thrill of the hunt, he fired his arrows, but they were not deer. They were a sage named Kindama and his wife who had taken the form of deer to make love in privacy in the forest. Pandu's arrows struck them both. As the sage lay dying, Pandu rushed forward, horrified at what he had done. He fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness, explaining it was a mistake, an accident born of his passion for hunting. But Kindama in his dying breaths was not in a forgiving mood. The pain, the betrayal, the intimate moment turned to agony, it all poured out as rage. "You have killed me in my moment of love," the sage gasped. "You have destroyed me while I was united with my beloved. Therefore I curse you, Pandu, you will die the same way. The moment you approach your wife with desire, the moment you unite with her in love, that moment will be your last. You will die in the act of love, just as you have killed me." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Pandu stood frozen, understanding what this meant. He was a king. Kings must produce heirs. He had 2 wives. His duty was to father children to continue the dynasty to secure the succession. But now, if he touched either of his wives with love, he would die instantly. The curse was perfect in its cruelty. Pandu could be a husband but never a lover. He could have wives but never truly be with them. He could be a king but could never fulfill a king's primary duty, producing heirs. Pandu returned to Hastinapura a broken man. He explained the curse to Kunti and Madri. Then, unable to bear the torment of being so close to his wives yet unable to touch them, he made a devastating decision. He would abdicate. He would give up the throne and go into the forest to live as an ascetic, to live away from temptation, to live away from the constant reminder of what he could never have. And just like that, the throne was empty again. Pandu had walked away. Bhishma could not take it. Vidura was not eligible. That left only one option, Dhritarashtra. Finally, after a lifetime of waiting, of watching, of resenting, Dhritarashtra would sit on the throne that should have been his from the beginning. But there was a condition. He would rule only as regent, only until Pandu returned or until Pandu's sons came of age. He would never truly be king. Even now, even sitting on the throne, he was still second choice, still the temporary solution, still the placeholder. Dhritarashtra accepted because what else could he do? He took the throne that was offered with all its conditions and limitations, and perhaps he told himself it was enough, perhaps he tried to be content. But resentment doesn't die easily. And when Dhritarashtra's wife Gandhari began having children, not just 1 or 2 but many, that resentment found a new form. Gandhari would give birth to 100 sons and 1 daughter, 100 sons. The eldest was named Duryodhana, which means the unconquerable one, or one who is difficult to fight. It was a powerful name for a powerful child. And Dhritarashtra, looking at his many sons, began to think, why should they be denied the throne? Why should the sons of the cursed King Pandu inherit when my sons are here, healthy, strong and numerous? The seed of the Great War had just sprouted into a very dangerous plant. Meanwhile, in the forest, Pandu lived with his wives in exile, practicing asceticism and trying to make peace with his curse. But the question of heirs remained. How could the dynasty continue without children? This is where Kunti revealed a secret she had been keeping for years, a secret from her youth, long before she married Pandu. When Kunti was a young princess, she had served a powerful but temperamental sage named Durvasa. She had served him so well, with such devotion and patience, that he was pleased. Before he left, he gave her a blessing, or perhaps a curse disguised as a blessing. He taught her a mantra, a sacred incantation that would allow her to invoke any god she chose. The god would come to her, and from that union she would have a child with the qualities of that deity. It was an incredible power, but also a dangerous one. Kunti was young and curious. After the sage left, she wondered, does this really work? She decided to test it just to see. She invoked Surya, the sun god. The sky blazed with light, and Surya himself appeared before her, radiant, powerful, overwhelming. And before Kunti fully understood what she had done, before she could take back the words, it was too late. The god had been summoned, and the mantra demanded fulfillment. Kunti gave birth to a son. A magnificent child, born with natural armor embedded in his skin and earrings of celestial gold. This child would be invincible in battle, blessed by the sun god himself. But Kunti was unmarried. She was a young princess. Having a child out of wedlock would destroy her reputation, her marriageability, her entire future. In panic and shame, she did the only thing she thought she could do. She placed the baby in a basket and set him afloat on a river, praying that someone would find him and raise him. That child survived. He was found by a charioteer named Adharatha and his wife Radha, who raised him as their own. They named him Vasusena, though he would later be known by another name, a name that would echo through history. Karna, the tragic hero, the loyal friend, the man who would fight on the side of the Kauravas in the Great War, never knowing that he was actually the eldest son of Kunti, the rightful eldest brother of the Pandavas. But that revelation is still years away. For now, Karna grew up as the son of a charioteer, his true heritage hidden, his destiny shaped by the circumstances of his abandonment. Now in the forest, Kunti revealed this secret to Pandu. She still remembered the mantra. She could invoke the gods again, and this time for a legitimate purpose, to give Pandu the heirs he needed. Pandu agreed. It was the only way. Using Kunti's power, they would have divine sons who could inherit the throne and continue the dynasty. Kunti invoked 3 gods. First, she called upon Yama, the god of death and dharma, the one who knows all laws and judges all souls. From this union was born Yudhishthira, the one who is steady in battle, or the righteous one. He was the eldest of the Pandavas, born with an innate understanding of dharma, truth and justice. But he was also born with a fatal flaw, an addiction to gambling and a rigid adherence to oaths, even destructive ones. Second, she called upon Vayu, the god of wind, representing strength, speed, and life force itself. From this union was born Bhima, the mighty one. Bhima was enormous, incredibly strong, with the appetite and the temper to match. He could eat enough for 10 men and fight like 100. But he was also impulsive, quick to anger, and sometimes cruel in his rage. Third, she called upon Indra, the king of the gods, lord of the heavens, warrior supreme. From this union was born Arjuna, the bright one or the pure one. Arjuna was the perfect warrior, skilled with all weapons, especially the bow. He was handsome, charismatic, favored by the gods. But he was also proud, sometimes arrogant, and would struggle with doubt at the most crucial moment. Then Kunti shared the mantra with Madri, Pandu's second wife. Madri invoked the Ashwini Kumaras, the divine twins who were physicians to the gods. From them were born Nakula and Sahadeva, twins as beautiful as their divine fathers, skilled in healing, animal care, and swordsmanship. But they would always be somewhat overshadowed by their 3 older brothers, always fighting for recognition and respect. These 5 boys were the Pandavas, the 5 sons of Pandu. They were divinely conceived, marked by destiny, raised to rule. They were everything that heroes should be, strong, skilled, and blessed by the gods themselves. But they were also deeply flawed. Each one carried weaknesses that would lead them into terrible decisions. They were not simply the good guys of this story. They were complicated, capable of both great nobility and terrible cruelty. For a while Pandu was content. He had sons, 5 magnificent sons. His duty to the dynasty was fulfilled. He lived peacefully in the forest with his wives and children, away from the complications of the throne. But humans are not meant to live in perpetual restraint. Desire does not die simply because it is forbidden, and curses, no matter how carefully you try to avoid them, have a way of fulfilling themselves. One day Pandu was walking in the forest with Madri. The spring was in full bloom, the air was sweet, and they were alone. The years of restraint, the years of being so close but never touching, the years of being husband and wife in name only, it all came to a head in one moment of weakness. Pandu reached for Madri. He touched her with love and desire, forgetting or perhaps no longer caring about the curse. For one brief moment he was simply a man with his wife, experiencing the love that had been denied to him for so long. And the curse activated immediately. Pandu collapsed and died in Madri's arms. The sage words had come true. He died in the act of love, just as kind Dharma had promised. Madri was devastated. She had been the cause, however unintentional, of her husband's death. In her grief and guilt she made a final terrible choice. She performed sati. She threw herself onto Pandu's funeral pyre and burned to death beside him. Kunti was left alone with 5 young boys and the body of her husband. She had to return to Hastinapura, to the palace where Dhritarashtra now ruled, where 100 sons had already been born, where the battle for succession was about to begin. So let's take stock of where we are now. The throne of Hastinapura is occupied by Dhritarashtra, a blind king who was never supposed to rule, who resents his position even as he holds it, who has 100 sons and believes they deserve the kingdom. Into this court walks Kunti with 5 boys, the sons of the cursed King Pandu, the rightful heirs to the throne, divinely born and destined for greatness. Somewhere in the kingdom, raised by a charioteer, is Karna, the secret firstborn son of Kunti, the abandoned child who carries the blood of the sun god, who will grow up to be one of the greatest warriors in the world, never knowing his true heritage. And watching over all of this is Bhishma, the immortal grandfather, bound by his terrible vow, unable to take the throne himself, unable to prevent the disaster he can see coming. The blind king who wants what he can never legitimately have. The cursed king's sons who inherit what they never should have needed. The secret son who was abandoned to his fate. And the immortal guardian who can only watch as everything falls apart. This is not a story about evil defeating good. This is a story about how broken systems create broken people and how broken people create broken societies. This is about how curses, both literal and metaphorical, echo through generations, shaping destinies, trapping people in roles they never chose. The Pandavas and Kauravas haven't even met yet. The Great War is still years away, but every piece is now in place. Every grievance has been planted, every resentment has taken root. In the next episode we'll see these cousins grow up together, competing, resenting, learning to hate. We'll meet Drona, the master teacher who will train them all in warfare. We'll witness the humiliations and jealousies that transform childhood rivalry into murderous hatred. But for now, understand this, the war was not started by evil men. It was started by blind men, cursed men, abandoned men, all trying to find their place in a world that seemed designed to deny them what they deserved. The curse continues, the tragedy deepens, and the greatest war in history draws closer with every passing day.